Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 24th of April of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most interesting part is that the most important and the most interesting updates are coming not from Bakhmut, as we used to think, or something like this. And these updates, the most important one, are not coming from Kherson area, where the previous two videos I was talking about some kind of counteroffensive operation from the Ukrainian side in this area. The most important, as I see according to the opinion of Military Summary channel, updates are coming from Moscow, from the territory, from the Moscow region, from the territory of Russian Federation. If you take a look at this map, you're gonna see there are two icons above Moscow. The first one is that the Russians, as a result of some actions, investigations, or some events that took place during the previous hours in the vicinity of the capital of Russian Federation, took a decision to close airspace above the territory of Moscow, above the territory of the airport Vnukovo. And they didn't provide any specified operation about that, but some sources are saying that the Russians managed to discover or found some kind of unknown aircraft drone in this area. So that was the reason why they took a decision to close the airspace. Furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to find another drone in this area. As you can see the picture of that drone. And that drone was created by the Ukrainians and was sent here. And there is a very interesting thing about this drone. The thing is that the Russians are saying that when they found the parts of the drone, because the drone fell down, the Russians are saying that drone fell down because of the empty tank. So this drone didn't have any fuel. But the thing is that the Russians are saying that that drone was fully armored with C4 explosion. So you understand. So there were no fuel in the tank, but this drone was fully loaded with weapon, with explosion. And of course, these two events means nothing when talking about the entire special operation. But if we increase the range of the data from this area 4 months, we're gonna see that there are a lot of icons above the territory of Russian Federation. For example, a few days ago, on the 6th of April of 2022, the Russians found another parts of destroyed drones on the north of Moscow. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that they found another drone in the vicinity of small town Sofina, this one also in the vicinity of Moscow, another drone, and so on. If you remember, during the previous months, the Russians found another parts of the drones on the way to the St. Petersburg. And the Russians also, if you remember, closed the airspace and above the St. Petersburg as well. Furthermore, if we go to the south a little bit from Moscow, we're going to find another parts of the 144 drones in this area. And the most important piece of news about all these events is that all of those drones fell down mainly because of empty tanks. So the Ukrainians launched them, and by the time when the tanks were empty, the drones fell down. This is the first interesting thing. And the second interesting thing, that most of that drones that fell down has explosion, that didn't detonate and that didn't explode during this process. So that all those drones were fully loaded and completely fully loaded, and were able to make some operation, to do something. And to tell the truth, this gives me like an idea, and force me to think that the Ukrainians are sending dozens of drones in direction of Moscow, and nobody knows the exact number of drones that are currently above the territory of Moscow. And it makes me think that the Ukrainians are hunting for somebody, or something, or somebody. And exactly the situation that all those drones, the parts of the drones that the Russians found on the ground, was fully loaded with explosion C4, makes me think that the Ukrainians were hunting for somebody. And I believe that it's completely my speculation, and I'm warning you that this is my speculation, that Ukrainians are sending drones for one purpose: to hunt somebody, someone very, very important. And they're not as you can see, and also this situation with the explosions on the with these drones are saying that, not detonated explosions on the drones, are saying that Ukrainians are not trying to make a massive massacre on the territory of Moscow or St. Petersburg. We understand that these drones has the purpose, and the timings that drones have is determined by the level of fuel they have in their tanks. One more time, I believe that Ukrainians are hunting for somebody, and I believe that they're going to send more and more drones in the direction of Moscow. Furthermore, I would like to add that if you remember, a few months ago, most of the military Russian experts and Western experts were saying that if we ever see the Ukrainian counteroffensive operation anywhere, in Kherson, in Zaporozhye, and any other front line and so on, first, before that offensive operation, we are going to see massive usage of the drones from the Ukrainian side. And these facts and the number of drones that were discovered in the vicinity of Moscow and St. Petersburg is the first fact saying that the Ukrainians have already launched their greatest counteroffensive operation, and currently we are the witnesses of the first stage of that operation. Massive drone attack, massive drone intelligence, and something like this. Furthermore, for example, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that during the previous 24 hours, as a result of clashes, artillery duels, and fierce fightings and so on, they managed to shut down up to 38 drones from the Ukrainian side. And the Russians are saying that this is the highest level of losses among Ukrainian drones, since the beginning of the special military operation. Just take a look at this map. When talking about Kherson, one drone was shut down in the south of Kherson in the small town Golaya Pristan. Another one was shut down near the Novaya Kakhovka. Another was shut down in the small town village Kairi. Just three drones, or at least three icons on the Kherson front line, with the Ukrainians, as a result of their counteroffensive operation, managed to short the gray zone and to capture this small island on the Dnipro River, and they managed to reduce the gray zone between the Ukrainian position and the town that is under Russian control by the name of Alyoshkin, Butsefal, Cheremushин, and all these small villages in this area. Furthermore, for example, the Institute of Study of War are saying that the Ukrainians managed to develop their attack and advance their attack along this road and get as close as possible to the river Konka. So this is another fact saying that there is the beginning of the counteroffensive operation from the Ukrainian side, at least the first phase of that operation. For example, the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes in this area, Kherson area, the Ukrainians lost 40 soldiers, 3 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system M77. Furthermore, when talking about Zaporozhye area, for example, some Russian military experts and sources like Rybar reported that during the previous 24 hours they spotted at least 2 newly created brigades from the 10th Military Corps, Ukrainian Corps. I'm talking about 116 Mechanized Brigade and 118th Mechanized Brigade. For example, if we take a look at the Russian deployment map, we can find 116 Mechanized Brigade here in the vicinity of Poltava, and at the same place we can find 118th Brigade. So these are 2 newly created brigades that were completely trained by the Western countries and so on. So these brigades, or at least some of that brigade, some groups of those brigades were spotted in the vicinity of Zaporozhye area. And that means that this is the third fact saying that Ukrainians have already launched their counteroffensive operation, but this is the first phase of that counteroffensive operation. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes on the South Donetsk area, the Ukrainians lost just 20 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system D-20. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that they managed to destroy at least 2 warehouses, one of them in the town by the name of Volnyansk, this one, and the Russians destroyed the warehouse of the 65th Mechanized Brigade in this area, and furthermore the Russians destroyed the warehouse of 122 2nd Territory Defense Brigade in the small town by the name of Volnyansk. So that was this was Ravnopolye 65th Mechanized Brigade, and Volnyansk was 102nd Territory Defense Brigade. The losses are not so heavy, but if we take a look and we try to increase the actions in this area for months, we see that that mainly the Russians were concentrated by attacking the warehouses, fuel depots, ammo depots, artillery system positions, and so on. The main goal from the Russian side is this area is not to reduce the Ukrainian forces, because there are not so many Ukrainian forces. Most of them, in main parts of them, are located in Zaporozhye, in Dnieper, in the small town by the name of Poltava, those newly created brigade. And when talking about this area, currently the Ukrainians are trying to solve one issue before moving soldiers, before moving manpower to the combat line. First, they want to concentrate as much as possible fuel depots, ammo depots, air defense systems, as much as possible, everything they need to solve completely any type of logistic issues that the Ukrainian army are able to face during the upcoming counteroffensive operation. It's logically and it is smart first to bring fuel, ammo, then air defense, number of drones, trenches, and after that, as soon as everything is prepared, to move the main forces. And not to move main forces, then to stuck in this area for a few months, and after that to start solving logistic issues, while the Russians are bombing and destroying the accumulation of Ukrainian forces with missiles, guided bombs, and so on. So everything is logically and everything is according to the military science. And the Russians understand this, so that's why they're targeting warehouses, ammo depots, and so on. When talking about South Donetsk area, the Russians are saying that they were targeting, mainly attacking Ugledar, and we saw a lot of video and photo confirmations of destroyed buildings, still ruins. And if you remember this morning, when the previous videos when talking about Ugledar, I mentioned that the Russians, according to my understanding of this special military operation, took a decision to erase Ugledar from the map of Google Earth or something like this, because it's very difficult. It's very tough nut to crack from the Russian side. I think that they understand that to take this town will bring a lot of losses from their side, casualties, and so on. So that's why they took a decision to erase this town, and currently they are very effective in this operation. More and more buildings are ruined, and there are a lot of soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, who were buried by the ruins of those buildings. The situation is very complicated for the Ukrainians as well, because they understand if they are defeated in this area, there are no towns behind Ugledar where they can prepare significant or powerful fortification. There are few towns like Prichistovka, but this is a small village, and this small village will be taken in a day. There is Novoukrayinka, the same small village with the strict streets and nothing more. There are no position where the Ukrainians are able to hold the Russian pressure. And the same thing about Bagayavlenka, small villages with the farms around this town. So the next town where the Ukrainians are able to do something with the Russians is Kurakhova. And this town is located very far from the south, and if the Russians are able to erase Ugledar from the map, they will be able to establish control over the entire South Donetsk area. And this is exactly what the Russians do, but I believe, according to my estimation and my understanding, the Ukrainians do still have around months or two before the Russians are able to erase this town from the maps. So we'll see what is going to be next. And now we are going to Donetsk area, the most important, the most bloody front line since the beginning of the special military operation. One more time, there are very heavy clashes in Marinka. The Russians stacked along the central line. The Ukrainians are sending more and more forces from the 35th Mechanized Brigade, from the 79th. Let's go back, let's return to the Russian deployment map. This map shows at least the forces. 79th Brigade, 72nd is located on the Ugledar front line. 35th Brigade in this area also take part in defense of Marinka. There are very heavy clashes from the Ukrainian side, and the Russians is the side who had progress. They're taking not even quarters or blocks, they're taking just like building by building, but they're advancing and they're pushing Ukrainian from this area. And the value of Marinka is not like the value of Bakhmut. It's like a symbol of Ukrainian defense. The value of Marinka is Krasnogorovka. Because if Marinka falls, Krasnogorovka is going to fall automatically. Because this town is located, there is a river on the north that the Russians can destroy every single supply road on this river and to reduce the defense possibilities of the forces in Krasnogorovka. So anyway, I don't want to talk a lot about this front line, but you need to understand the fall of Marinka means the automatic collapse of Krasnogorovka that Ukrainians use for shelling and bombing Donetsk since the beginning of the special military operation. Another important battle in Donetsk is Avdiivka, but recently we haven't seen any changes and any notes, any updates on the ground. I believe maybe since the beginning of the previous week. The Russians stopped bombing this area with the guided bombs, stopped trying to encircle this area, stopped moving and developing and advancing in direction of Orlovka from the south from Vadiana or from Krasnogorovka from the east. Mainly and currently the Russians are concentrated on the two towns, on few towns like Novokalinovo, Keramikino, Chertina. The Russians are trying to advance in this direction and they started bombing and shelling this area heavily. If we try to increase the level of events during the past week, we see how many actions took place in this area. There was like a counteroffensive operation from the Ukrainian side. There was clashes along the railroad ways. The Russians were attacking on the Ukrainian positions in this area, trying to advance, and they're advancing very slowly. They have a lack of manpower in this area. They don't have a fully loaded brigades or army to develop. They have limited resources and they're trying to use them very carefully, but no matter the number and the level of resources, they have a goal and they have an order to take control over Achertina, the town that's located on the west-north of Krasnogorovka, the east town. And every single event that took place in this area during the previous 24 hours of the previous week had the one purpose: to get as close as possible to Achertina and to move the Ukrainian artillery as far as possible from Donetsk. So this is about this area. And now we are coming to the most important, the most valuable front line, and I'm talking about Bakhmut. There are also a lot of icons in this area. The Russian sources map has been updated. Every single map has been updated when talking about Bakhmut. There are more sources, more confirmation, either video and photo, and maybe audio confirmations that the Russians managed not just to capture the 0506 road in this small cross, in this small interception. The Russians managed to develop that bridgehead to the north, to the west, to the south, to the east. And from now on, I'm not sure that the Russians, the Ukrainians, are able to make any counteroffensive operation and to push the Russians back from this bridgehead. More and more sources are coming from the area between Orekhovo, Vasilievka and Grigorievka. If you remember, during the previous week, I paid a lot of attention to this area. If you remember, the Russians were saying that they destroy a fuel depot of 17th Tank Brigade in this, who were located in this area. This is not 100, but just 17th Tank Brigade, sorry, my bad. And about 77th Air Mobile Brigade, the Russians attacked those positions as well. There are also 67th, 56th brigades and so on. And for example, today the Russians reported that they destroyed another fuel depot of 17th Tank Brigade somewhere in this area. Also, the Russians reported about attack of 24th Mechanized Brigade in the vicinity of Dzержinsk, and I'm talking about Terezk-New agglomeration. And the Russians attacked position of the 54th Mechanized Brigade in the vicinity of Lysychansk, so somewhere in this area. And 54th Brigade is located in the vicinity of Verkhnyokamyanskaya and Zolotarevka. So we'll come back to this area in a minute. So, and currently during the day we got another piece of news that we're saying that the Russians are trying to advance between Orekhovo, Vasilievka and Grigorievka right in front of 17th Tank Brigade. And one more time, as a result, at least for the previous week, this brigade lost at least 2 fuel depots of their tank brigades. And of course, when talking about tanks, the most important part is fuel. ammo, shells, of course, but without fuel. It's just some kind of, I don't know, just iron fortifications that can be destroyed even with some pots or something like this. So the Russians started their advancing in this direction, trying to split and to cut supply roads between these two towns and to complete the encirclement of Grigorievka, Kalinovka. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine included Novomarkova, this town, in their daily report, saying that they managed to repulse another attack from the Russians in this area. When talking about Bakhmut itself, we see that this map has been updated. The Russians are pushing from the north, from the northwest, from the east, from the south. The tastiest piece of cake still remains under Ukrainian control, and I'm talking about the western part and the ex-military base's central part, and the block between these two blocks, western the military base. I'm talking about this one. This the tastiest piece of cake. That by taking this part of Bakhmut, the Russians are able to solve this issue of Bakhmut completely. And according to the Russian plans, they still have 2 weeks before doing this. The Ukrainians, if you remember yesterday, the head of this defense operation Syrsky reported that their job is not to give and to step back from Bakhmut at least until the victory day, and this is the next day that both parties are going to focus on to complete this mission. So we'll see whether this is possible or not. Furthermore, a very interesting update are coming from Konstantinovka. The Russians are saying that as a result of missile attack, they managed to destroy the base of Foreign Legion Georgian Battalion, the part of Foreign Legion Georgian Battalion. And as a result of that attack, 60 soldiers were killed and buried by the ruins of the building. 20 were heavily wounded, and also the Russians are saying that they managed to destroy up to 15 armored vehicles of that Georgian battalion in this area. Very heavy losses. If we take a look at the deployment map, we see that according to this map, the main forces, Georgian forces, are located in Bakhmut, in the central part, somewhere in the vicinity of military base in the central part of western Bakhmut. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense added that those were Georgian forces who was related to the casualties and to tortures and killings of the Russians a year ago. If you remember, in March, in April, and May, there was a lot of video and photo confirmation when the Georgian soldiers, according to the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation, according to the Russian sources, were killing the Russian soldiers by cutting their head off or something like this. And currently, today, the Russians are saying that they managed to discover those forces, Georgian forces, and to destroy them by Iskander rocket in Konstantinovka. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that when talking about that Iskander launch, the report of the Ministry of Defense itself, of the report of the local military authorities of the Russian Federation, as a result of clashes during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to destroy around 380 soldiers, around 35 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery losses. So that was the heaviest day of the losses among the armored vehicles, at least, and the manpower since the beginning of the special military operation. We see that Bakhmut is collapsing, and this town is going to be collapsed very soon, and something tells me that even before the victory day. We'll see. Anyway, whether Ukrainians are able to hold the Russians' pressure or not. The Russians also are saying that they managed to establish control over the gas station in Sporna. As you can see, the Russian sources map says that this area is already under Russian control, but today there was some kind of maybe adjusting of information or something like this. Anyway, the Russians are saying that they captured and they're pushing Ukrainians back from this territory in direction of Ivano-Darievka. One more time, very interesting updates are coming from Bilogorovka. The Russians published a video of a usage of flamethrower system TOSEM-1. They were bombing and attacking this industrial zone. If you remember, the Russians were advancing in the southeast of this area, kept by capturing this forest, but they can't proceed, they can't continue advancing longer because of this industrial zone, because of this hill. It's very difficult, so that's why the Russians took a decision to attack these forces behind this area, and for these purposes they need to penetrate and to defeat the Ukrainians' 54th Mechanized Brigade that located in Verkhnekamianska and on the northwest of Zolotarevka. These two brigades And for example, today the Russians are saying that they managed to do this, they attacked those positions. So I expect that within the next few days, the Russians will be able to advance in this area and to capture the forest line that located on the south of Bilogorovka, and to reduce the flexibility and the possibilities of Ukrainians in this area as much as possible, and maybe even to force them to step back from this area. When talking about Kupiansk and Liman front line, the picture is the same as we saw yesterday and the day before yesterday, just with the changes on the Kupiansk front line. The Russians are saying that as a result of clashes on these two front lines, the Ukrainians lost around 160 soldiers, 5 armored vehicles, 2 artillery systems, and 1 radar AN-TPQ-50 that located on the south of Belgorod. And mainly this update is connected with the pieces of news we discussed about attacks in direction of Moscow, because the Ukrainians currently are sending dozens of drones in that direction with few purposes. One of them is they're trying to hunt somebody very important, and the second one is to discover and to spot the Russian air defense systems with the same purpose, to suppress and to to develop or to give more chances to find and hunt somebody very important in Russia. So that was the plans and so on. We'll see whether the Ukrainians are able to do this or not, but I believe that the Russians are prepared. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that they destroyed a few warehouses in this area as well. In the vicinity of Stelmakhovka, there was destroyed the warehouses of 92nd Mechanized Brigade. And one more time, we see that the level of losses of the Ukrainians in the Kupiansk front line has been increased. And for example, for the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers. Yesterday, they lost 95 soldiers. The day before yesterday, 60. The day on the 21st of April, 60 soldiers. On the 20th of April, 55 soldiers. And before that, on the 19th, 120 soldiers. And before that, the level of losses was on the level of 35 soldiers per day. So we see, and this is another fact of intensifying of Russian activity in this area, and maybe soon the Russians will start advancing. And as we discussed for many times, that to take control over Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, and according to the Russian sources, this is the main goal for them, to liberate DPR area. They need to capture these towns, but to do this, there's just one way, is the big returns of the Russians in direction of Izium. But to do this, they need to start advancing from the north to capture Liman, to capture Yampolovka, to capture Izium, and after that, to start encirclement of Slavyansk-Kramatorsk. So I expect that the Russians are going to start advancing on the north very soon, and that they will try to develop and to achieve as much as possible on that front line. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.